Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and alcohol coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, alcohol, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bite Size Balance. I have a really interesting guest with me today. I've got Jay Fields here. Hi, Jay.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good.
Great. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Jay, and then we're going to get going. Jay is a somatic coach, educator, and author who's devoted her life to helping people leverage the nervous system to manage their emotions more effectively. She teaches women how to harness their body, brain, and nervous system to build self-trust and to show up more authentically in their personal and professional relationships. Jay is also the author of the popular LinkedIn learning courses, Overcoming Insecurity for More Confidence at Work, Managing Your Emotions at Work, and Reduce Stress and Anxiety by Managing Your Nervous System. And I believe you're coming to us today from Ojai, California. Is that right?
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
Exciting. I've only been there once.
It's gorgeous.
It was ages and ages ago, and I feel like I was there for a partner's retreat with my law firm.
So that was probably not the most fun reason to be here, but it is a pretty place to be.
I probably had a pretty good time though. I'm not going to lie. I feel pretty confident it would have been in my drinking days the last time. Yeah. Okay. Well, welcome, Jay. I'm really glad to have you here today. I think there's quite a bit of overlap in terms of what we do, but I think you probably do it in a different way than I do it. And I was really interested in having you on here to talk about some of the things that we don't talk about or haven't talked about yet on this podcast, including this topic of how we relate to other people and how the way that we show up in our relationships can actually contribute to how we feel, the overwhelm in our lives, the amount of stress that we feel, and then of course, the likelihood of all of that contributing to a burnout, which is something that we talk a lot about on this podcast, stress and overwhelm and how to manage that and prevent burnout and recover from burnout. But one of the things that you seem to focus on is on helping women change the way they relate to other people in order to help reduce some of that stress and overwhelm that they might have in their lives. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. I would say the thing that every woman who comes to me has in common is that they grew up with the unspoken rule that to be a good person in a relationship means never making someone else uncomfortable.
Right. 100%.
And there's your foundation right there for all sorts of, behaviors like people pleasing that leads to burnout, drinking because you're trying to manage, like, this doesn't feel good to me to be this person who's trying to always make other people okay. It leads to not knowing how to manage emotions because you're so busy managing other people. You're so busy giving your empathy and compassion out that it doesn't go in. So I feel like that's kind of this underlying commonality is they've been working off this blueprint that says being a good person means nobody around you ever gets to be uncomfortable.
Right.
And then you're just screwed.
Yeah. And presumably that leads to some of those behaviors that I see often in my clients, and I'm sure you see as well, those really common behaviors that feel like they're serving us for a period of time. And then at some point it becomes pretty clear that they're not, like people pleasing or an inability to set boundaries. And then, of course, an over-reliance on unhealthy coping mechanisms as a way to deal with the stress and overwhelm of the way you're showing up in the world and how it feels.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Those things that were adaptive at some point because they worked, right? They got you through your family system. They got you through your college where you went, wherever, the workplace you're in, but they are maladaptive in the places that bring you fulfillment, right? Like if I am the boundaryless person who never says no to anything, my boss loves me, but my husband doesn't. Or my best friend or my mom, like the behaviors that are adaptive at certain times in our life or certain places in our life are the ones that eventually become maladaptive in the places that we care the most about. But then we've so practiced the other behaviors, we don't have another skill set. And that's what happens is I feel like the women who come to me they've gotten far on their coping mechanisms, but what they've really gotten is far away from themselves.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. That really resonates with me. And I definitely see that in the women that I work with, no matter what the original sort of main challenges they come for support around. I see that really, really commonly. Okay. So let's talk about this, because this is not something we've talked about a lot on this podcast, this idea of really paying attention to the way we relate to other people and starting to, presumably the first step in this, as it is with most things, is awareness. It's like starting to get mindful around how is it that I'm showing up and what are the patterns that I'm in? How am I relating to people all the time? And how's that making me feel? And how's it affecting the way I'm behaving? And how is it generally serving me?
Yes.
Is that generally where you start? So
yeah.
How do we get started with that? How does that work?
So the work that I do kind of falls into 3 topics, and it doesn't necessarily go in this order, but they all weave together. And the first one I call regulate. That's where we learn about how to be more in your body and how to have awareness that isn't conceptual, because most of the women who come to me have conceptual self-awareness. They can think about themselves all day long. They can analyze, they can ruminate, they can project. But to experience themselves, to know what they're like right now, you just took a deep breath. Even as I said the word experience, like sometimes there's like, oh, right, I have a body. And knowing then through that awareness, how to regulate yourself, how to know when you are up-regulated or down-regulated and not being in your best self. And if those words don't make sense, I can unpack those.
Yeah, no, I think they do. Can you give some examples of like, if we're in that regulate category, what are some ways that a person might notice? So I like the idea of getting out of the conceptual thinking about yourself and into like, so this is like the somatic kind of how it feels in your body stuff that we're talking about.
Right.
So what are some examples of things that you might feel or that people typically feel? And I'm sure it's different depending on the person, but common things that people feel, for example, when they're under significant stress, or whatever the opposite of that is, relaxed, I guess. Like what are some of those symptoms and signs?
Well, so our body goes kind of in 2 directions for stress. One is the fight flight, where we get mobilized. That's the technical term for it. So you feel your breath is shallow and fast, your heartbeat is high. You might find yourself like multitasking, moving fast, talking fast, doing a lot of things at once. Tension arrives in the body. That's where you're like clenching the jaw or throat and your shoulders are tight. Whereas the other way we go in stress is freeze, that kind of immobilized. We've been go long enough, you drop. This is burnout, right? This is that place where you feel numb, you feel heavy, you feel like depressed in the sense of like just not having energy. People report there that there's like fogginess, right? Like you just kind of feel disconnected, withdrawn. So those are the experiences of those kind of being mobilized, immobilized. Whereas being in what's called in the nervous system language is called social engagement. So we've got fight, flight at the top, we've got freeze at the bottom, and then there's social engagement. And that's where you feel safe. So you feel open and curious. You're able to read other people and make connections and see possibilities. And this is where you have access to like your whole human thinking brain, and where women would just report, like, I feel like me,
Yeah. I hear that a lot. Women say, I just want to feel normal again. I just want to feel like me again. It's been a long time since I felt like me. And a lot of women can't even tell me what that felt like. It's been so long, but they know that wherever they are now, it's not there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, starting there, like, as you said, because the awareness first of like, where am I? Where is my nervous system right now? Because if you're anywhere in the mobilized or immobilized, it impacts the way you experience yourself, other people in the world around you. And so being able to first have that foundation of awareness of what's your experience in your body and what is your nervous system state is then the foundation for the next piece, which is, I call it reframe. And this is the place this is the part of my work that looks the most like therapy, as it were. This is like going back to what were the blueprints you got for being a good person? Like the one I mentioned, like to be a good person means that you don't make other people uncomfortable. This is the place where you learn, what did you do with big, hard emotions when you grew up? Like, what did you learn in your family system? What did you learn in your community, society at large, for if I feel sad or I feel scared? Because most of the people who come to me learned that the way to manage emotions is to fix them or figure them out, which is not the same as feel them and soothe yourself.
I deal with a lot of people who learned to just not talk about them at all. So there's no fixing, there's no figuring out. If you have an emotion, you shouldn't be having it. Let's just put it away. So does that happen as well?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's like, that's not there. There's no feelings, there's just thinking about feelings or thinking about a strategy to manage what's happening. Yeah.
Sure. So what's the problem for people who are listening? What's the problem with approaching emotions from the perspective of, I just need to fix this or figure this out? And what's the alternative?
I'm trying to think of it rather than giving you a straight answer, giving you an example here. It's kind of like, if you're trying to, let me do it this way. And for people who are not looking at it, I've got my hands in front of me and one hand is at one height, the other is another height. So if I'm in a feeling and I'm sad, let's say, and I'm trying to meet that feeling from my head, I don't ever quite meet it. It's like a disconnect. There's like, I know the sadness is over here and I'm thinking about it. So there's a way that I feel consciously or not, just like not fully met or kind of alone in the feeling and a little bit like strung out. Like I've got to do something. I've got to make something happen with my head in order for this to go away. Whereas if you can empathize with yourself, if you can say, of course I feel this way, I'm scared. Why wouldn't I be scared? I've never done this before, or there's a lot on the line here, or I'm scared this person won't like me if I set this boundary. And you can feel your own fear and you can say, that makes sense to me. It's like you make a connection, and the connection you make is to your own felt sense of yourself. Because this is going back to the body stuff, right? If I'm only ever up here in my head, I'm missing a lot of my own experience. And that, in the same way that any relationship with another person that you love and you want to be with is in large part because you can feel that person and you can feel them feeling you as opposed to them thinking about you. That's what we want with ourselves. We want to feel ourselves. And if the only way you know how to work with emotions is to think about them, right, you're going to always feel a little bit alone with yourself, if that makes sense.
Right. So when you say, we're talking about this idea of like fixing it or figuring it out, that's like the head's approach to the emotion. And what you're saying is, instead of the brain approach to the emotion, there's another way to process that emotion or deal with that emotion, which is what you're calling felt sense, which, can you just define felt sense for people listening, what that means?
Yeah, it means that you can feel your own experience. Because
physically, in your body.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if I'm sad, for me, that shows up as I feel kind of heavy in my chest or like my belly's kind of churny. And to be able to say to myself, like put my hands on my heart and my belly and say, of course I'm sad. There's there's a meeting up with, I'm now the person having that experience. And what research tells us in neurobiology is that felt experience, being in your body, lights up different parts of your brain than thinking does. And the parts of your brain that it lights up are the parts that have to do with being able to have compassion, to have empathy, to have courage, to be connected to your intuition. So it's all of these resources that a person would need in order to manage emotions. And they're there in the experience of ourself, as opposed to in the thinking of ourselves. And let me give you an example. And this is relational with another person as opposed to with yourself. So let's say, dear friend, God forbid, gets diagnosed with a terminal illness. And you say to them, you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. It'll be fine. And like, we're going to find all the best research and the doctors, and we're going to get you there. And like, you're going to make this. So imagine what that would feel like to that person versus saying, I'm so sorry you're going through this. This must be really scary. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what's going to happen, but no matter what happens, I am here for you. Mm-hmm. The first one is head, mm-hmm. right? You're going to be okay, because that's what we think someone wants to hear. But if you're not going to be, if it's terminal, you're not going to be okay, right? And in the same sense of, if you're sad or if you're scared and you say to yourself, it's going to be okay, you don't believe yourself.
Right.
You wouldn't be sad or scared if it was going to be okay.
Right.
So you need to hear those things of like, I'm here for you. And that's what felt sense is. It's like knowing that you can feel and recognize when you showed up for yourself in a way that's warm and caring and present.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense to me. And going back to what you said about the research that suggests that when you're in that state, when you're giving yourself the chance to actually feel it physically in your body, to have that felt sense experience, that's when you unlock things like compassion, courage, and intuition. I'm thinking, okay, this makes really good sense to me in terms of the work that I do with women around drinking less, for example, because I'm always trying to focus on self-compassion and helping them grow their own compassion for themselves. If they're feeling emotions and they're trying to figure them out with their head, they have less of a chance of accessing that self-compassion, of accessing that intuition, of accessing, I always think of the intuition as like sort of your authentic, genuine self, the part of you who has your best interests at heart. And that's the part of you in the moment that's going to give you the courage and the guidance to not have a drink and give yourself the space to feel the thing, and and all of that. So this is making more sense to me now as we're chatting, this idea of the distinction between the brain and so the way we experience emotion with our brain and the way we experience emotion with our body.
Yeah.
And so the reframing you're saying is asking yourself, is really starting to get aware and learn as much as you can about the ways that you have been taught to handle emotion, the things that you've learned about how to deal with and process emotion, and then start working on, assuming it's with your brain, which I think it probably is for most people, as you said, then start working on practicing how to feel it in your body.
Yeah. And how to essentially, it's like how to be friendly to yourself when you're having a feeling that you'd rather not be having.
So how do you do that? Like, how do you get friendly with yourself? How do you give yourself the space? Because a lot of my clients struggle with this. The clients who are eating too much, drinking too much, using other tools to escape or numb an emotion that feels too big for them. How do they start feeling it?
My favorite shorthand for this comes from a woman named Sarah Payton. I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but she wrote a book called Your Resonant Self. Mm-hmm. And I share this all the time with my clients, and they say this is like a game changer for them. And it's the two words, of course. Mm-hmm. Of course, I'm feeling this way. Mm-hmm. Of course, I just overate. Of course, I drank after yesterday, that, the horrible day that was yesterday. Yeah. And what that does is it says it's a way of your brain saying to your heart, essentially, you're not bad or weird or crazy for feeling that way.
Right.
And that's the foundation from which you have now become a partner to yourself. Because most people, like you said, want to ignore that they did the thing or felt the thing. Like there's so much shame involved in overeating, for example, that it's just like, I would rather pretend that didn't happen and move on. Or there's so much shame that there's like, oh, what a piece of crap you are. I can't believe you did that again. You're, if you weren't so weak, or you weren't so insert mean word here. Mm-hmm. And that's where we start from. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't give you that sense of being close to yourself. So just saying, of course, is like, I might not like that I'm feeling this way. I might not want to accept it, but I can at least see that this is real and it makes sense.
Yeah.
Because one of the ways we become a good resource to ourselves is when we have access to our whole brain, right? When our whole brain is working and not just the lizard brain that's like looking for survival.
Right.
And if you can say to yourself, of course I feel this way, it's a way of bringing together the front of your brain that makes sense of things with the midbrain and saying like, this feeling is there and it makes sense to me. And what that does is it helps to integrate your brain again, which helps to regulate your nervous system. And you have better access to being a more grounded person to be like, okay, so now what do I want to do with this?
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that makes total sense to me. And you could use this, it could be emotions that come up as a result of engaging in a behavior that, objectively doesn't serve you and feels bad or shameful. I'm putting that in the air quotes to you. Or it could be that you're having an emotion from something completely disconnected from those types of behaviors, but that emotion feels too big to you. It feels too problematic to you. Your brain is telling you, avoid this at all costs. And so you're thinking about drinking, or you're thinking about eating, or you're thinking about going down the rabbit hole of Instagram or TikTok or getting online and doing some shopping, because that's a distraction from this emotion that your brain is telling you is too much for you. But saying those words, of course, legitimizes that emotion and connects your brain with your body in a way and allows you to stop, feel it. And then what happens when we let ourselves feel it? How does that impact next steps?
It fundamentally, the biggest thing is that it doesn't take you away from yourself.
Yeah.
Because anytime that we're trying to avoid feeling something, there is some level of self-abandonment happening.
Right.
Because the experience is real and it's happening it's real for you and it's happening from your neck down. And if you don't want to have it, you aren't fully there.
Right.
And so the thing that it does for us is it's like it's the catch-22. Nobody wants to feel their feelings, but if you can stay with your experience, you actually have access to the resources that your brain would give you in order to feel those things.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to ride it out for a bit. And in the riding out of the emotion is where you build the confidence, and the confidence that you can do it, but also that good things come when you do that it gets easier, that you're able to access that compassion, that intuition, and the things that actually help you sometimes make sense of what it is you're feeling. Sometimes not. Sometimes I know it don't make sense. Sometimes I don't make sense of it.
Right.
Yeah. But the sitting with it, that's something that I try to teach. I'm trying to teach women to experiment with the sitting with it, because the avoiding of it is what's causing the problematic behavior, right? The avoiding of it. So I'm trying to teach women and so that they can build confidence in their own ability to sit with emotions, that they will pass eventually, that they won't kill them, that they can do it. And that actually sometimes, most of the time, it feels a lot better to feel the emotion, because it helps, if you sit with it and process it, it helps to diffuse it oftentimes for us. But I've never been able to make that connection between the brain and the body on that. So I think that's really interesting. And it makes really good sense to me that and I like that idea of the self-abandonment that happens when we choose to go with the brain instead of with the body.
Yeah.
And that it keeps us from feeling whole. And I think that's really powerful for anyone who's listening, who's using, I'm just thinking back to when I was a drinker, and how if I had been able to frame it from that perspective of every time you choose to drink, you're abandoning yourself, that would have been pretty.
It lands.
Impactful. Yeah. Yeah. It's a really interesting and powerful way of characterizing what's happening in that moment. And that's not to put blame on anyone who's doing that. That's not the point.
No, not at all.
It's to try to explain it a little and give you another way of looking at it. And, again, it's about starting to question and get curious around whether this behavior actually is serving you, because it feels like it's serving you. For a lot of women, it feels like it serves us to escape or to numb, to get out of it. But is it serving you if what it's really doing is causing you to abandon yourself in that moment and keeping you from that wholeness and that intuition that you're talking about?
Right.
Yeah.
Listening to you saying all that, it's making me think of like trying to tie this back in. Sometimes it's easier to see it when it's an external relationship. So talking about this, having a felt sense of yourself or a felt connection. If every time you went to your best friend and confided in her about how you felt, a difficult feeling, the response was, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. Don't feel that way.
Right.
Or, you're talking about somebody at work that is a troublemaker. Then she's like, well, you know what? I know someone who knows that person. I'll talk to them. Like, I'll fix this.
I'll fix it. Yeah.
Right? I'll fix this. Like, or the answer is, I never liked that person anyway. We don't like them. None of those things make you feel less of the feeling. And there's a sense of having that person, they love you, they're in it, they're like, don't feel that way, you're better than this, it's going to get better, I'll fix this, I'm here with you. But like, there's this underlying feeling of loneliness in that. And as opposed to if your best friend said to you, oh, Wendy, I am so sorry, that's awful. It totally makes sense to me that you feel scared in this situation. I would feel scared if I was in that situation. Is there anything I can do that would make you feel like I'm here for you? Do you feel the difference in those?
Oh, totally. Totally. And I was just thinking, as you were talking about, how I always say to my kids, and I say this to my clients sometimes too, like, if you're feeling it, it's real. Like, it's real if you feel it. Like, it doesn't matter whether it makes sense to me or to anybody else. If you're feeling hurt, if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling angry, then you're feeling it. Right. But it's so interesting how we don't apply that same rule to ourselves.
No, we don't.
It's like, it doesn't legitimize the feeling. When someone says to you, let me fix it, it feels like you're not actually being seen. Somehow your thing is a problem.
Yes.
So it's something problematic, and let's just get rid of this pesky thing and clear it away so that we can get back to whatever we were doing before.
Right. You get the message that we can be close as long as you're shiny and calm and good.
Yeah.
And I feel like, the underlying piece is the sense of loneliness. So if you can offer it to yourself, right? If you can offer, like, I feel me. I'm not going to tell myself I'm bad for feeling this. I don't have to like that I feel this. And you can even say that I don't like feeling this way.
Yeah.
I don't like feeling this way is a lot different than trying to think your way out of it. Because does that make, like, you can, you're there, you're matched up with you.
Yeah.
And and so I think, when we have to go back to the relational piece, like, many of us growing up got this message, like, that it's more important to make other people comfortable. So we pay more attention to other people. We don't pay attention to our experience. It's almost as if, like, I used to be this way when I was with anyone else, whether it was one-on-one like this or in a party situation or at work with a team. It was as if anytime another human being was in the room, I disappeared. Like, I became a head trying to strategize who I needed to be and what I needed to do to be okay. And it wasn't until I was living alone, and, like, believe me, I lived like in a yurt alone in the middle of the woods, because I was like, when I'm not around people, I just want to be, because when I was alone, it was the only time I felt like I filled myself back up again. Like, I took up space, like I had an experience, like I could feel, walking around my house cleaning and, like, humming and feel my body again. And, this comes from this idea that if there's someone else around, their reality is somehow more important. So mine goes away.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I was talking to another, and she was on my podcast, but I can't remember if we talked about this on the podcast or if I talked with her about this offline. But Lorna Wilson, who's a coach that I really respect, and she has talked to me before about this idea of, like, reading the room. Like, women do that. They walk in and they read the room, and it's all about, and I think it's what you're talking about, this whole, like, what's happening in everybody else's heads right now? Who's feeling good? Who's feeling left out? Who's feeling confident? Who's, and so in when we're doing that reading of the room, we're necessarily not taking our own temperature. We're paying attention to what everyone else is doing. And I do think we have a tendency to do that. And I do think that there might be a gender, I don't know what the word is for that, but I do think it's more common that it happened, that women do. I think women do that more than men. I think And that's probably because of the way we were raised, like you said, and all of these sort of.
We have to take care of other people.
Yeah, taking care of other people. Exactly. Yeah, the nurturing.
So there's this technique then called shuttling. And I don't know if you've heard about this, but reading the room is, to me, it's that total external awareness all the time, reading. So shuttling is like shuttling, like a loom, sending a shuttle back and forth. And you send your awareness out, read the room, great, do that. And then you send it back. What's happening in my body that I've seen that? Are my shoulders tensing? Is my stomach turning? And then you go back and you read the room again. What's that person's facial expression? What's their body language telling me? And you come back and you feel, this is my feet on the ground. This is where I am. And then you go, so it's like, this is how you weave a reality. You send the shuttle out to that external, you send the shuttle back to the internal, and you start to get a read on what is true for me in this. You put yourself in that space, you create a reality of your own while there's external reality, because this is the number one thing that I see change people's understanding of like how to relate to other people, is that there is not just one reality happening. We have this way of believing that, like, if I'm here with you and for whatever reason I experience you as the more important person, now your reality gets to matter more than mine, and I'm just kind of like becoming whatever.
Sure. And also that I'm experiencing that reality that way. Like, I think we assume that the other person is experiencing the reality the same way, that I'm also feeling like I'm more important, right? If in that example that you just gave. And I think it's more often than not, we're wrong on that, because we actually don't get it right, what other people are thinking or feeling. Yeah. So this is really interesting to me. So the idea is that so first we need to regulate, just to go back to the three things. So first we need to regulate, and we need to learn how to be more in our body, to start noticing when we're in fight, when we're in flight, when we're in freeze, when we're not in any of those things, and we're in what I would call the relaxation response, which is where we're back in our bodies, and we're not in the stress cycle, we're on the relaxed side of the stress cycle, and we're able to engage socially. We can be curious and make the connections that you're talking about and access our whole brain. So first we do that, and that's how we start to notice when we're not regulated. And then from that, we can start paying attention to when that's happening. And then we can ask the next question, which is, why am I showing up the way I'm showing up here? Like that whole reframing piece that you're talking about. What's the thing that I'm telling myself about this and about the feeling that's coming up in my body and what I need to do with that? Is that serving me? And then the next piece is, how do I learn to do that differently and actually let myself feel it in my body, not just in my brain? And then from that, how does that impact the way we relate? So if we're talking about these problematic behaviors, like the people pleasing and the boundaries and all of that, how does getting back into our feelings in our body and getting better at giving ourselves the space to experience that and not be dismissive of it, how does that help us with those learned behaviors that we have that aren't serving us? Yeah.
So fundamentally, it's like connection to reality and resources. But let me give you like a story example of this that came up the other day with a client. It's not work related. She was actually off of work and she was taking her dogs for a walk. She has 2 dogs, and she got a text from a friend, a dear friend, asking for a favor. It's a long story what the favor was, but suffice it to say, it was a favor that was going to put her out really big, and she didn't want to do it. And she automatically got anxious, and she was breathing heavy, breathing shallow, heart rate racing. She said she just went into like total strategy in her head, like, okay, how do I say no to this? If I say yes, how do I manage that? And she said she spent like 45 minutes of her walk just in this spin. And her dogs were going nuts on the end of their leash because her nervous system was all revved up. So now her dogs are all revved up, which is making it worse. And she said, I'm trying to like figure this out. And then she said, I remembered our work together, and I just stopped and I held the leashes in my hand, and I felt that one was leather and one was webbing and they felt different. And this was her way of grounding back into her body. In this moment, there's anxiety, but there's also this experience of a leather leash in one hand and a webbing leash in the other hand. So this is her anchoring in, this is my world right now. It's true that I'm anxious. It's also true that there's this part of me that can feel these leashes. So her nervous system regulated. Then from there, she asked herself, what am I really feeling? Like, what's the feeling? Because she's anxious, but what's the feeling? And the feeling was, I'm scared. And this is where that like reframe comes along, because she asked herself, well, what am I scared of? And the thing was, she was scared that her friend would think that she was like this rigid rule follower who couldn't accommodate what he was asking for. And that ultimately, worst case scenario, he would stop being her friend. Right. So she practices empathy. Of course, this is scary for me. I really, really love this person and this friendship, and I value it. And I've been taught to believe that I don't get to have a need with someone that I love. So she could see from her mind and realize that's not real. That's just my conditioning. And then it was a text that came in. So she texted him back and she said, I'm scared that if I tell you no, you're going to think I'm rigid and don't care about you. But in reality, this really won't work for me. And I have to say no. And she said it was like, there was like panic in saying it, because it was like breaking the rule that she's going to upset this person, but she knew how to keep herself regulated. So she said the thing that was true. I'm scared, but it's a no for me. And he wrote back and he said, oh, so glad you said so. No problem. And she was like, I had to go home and take a nap because it was such this huge thing. So all this to say, back to your question of like, how does that help us? It helps us because you can be with what's true for you for enough beats to be able to know how to say something true to someone else, which creates connection.
Right. That little pause allows you to actually respond instead of react which is something that I have talked about before, this idea of the difference between reacting and responding, and how when we're in that fight or flight place, we are reacting. It's just an instinctive physiological drive to stay safe. And it doesn't usually serve us. A lot of the time, it's not actually what actually would serve us best. And if we can figure out how to slow down, take a beat. I like this idea of using that, like creating that pause or that beat by connecting with what's actually physically happening in your body. Then we can respond in a way that serves us better, which is pretty much always going to be rooted in truth. Right. So I like that. That makes total sense to me. Thank you for explaining that. I think
because what I've found in my work and how I've woven all these different things together over the years is that just one of those pieces isn't enough. Knowing how to regulate yourself is great, but then what? Right. Or knowing that you tend to be a people pleaser and having that awareness is great. But if you can't regulate yourself enough to do something differently, the awareness doesn't help you.
Right.
And then the third piece, the thing that like my clients, we do a lot of work on is like actual language. How do you say something to someone else? If you're used to being a people pleaser, or you're used to performing, right, in any way, to say something true about yourself and to believe that your experience gets to matter enough to say something true is like, it's a different language. Right. I mean, because in that example with my client, in the past, she would have said, sure, that's one, sure, I can do that. And then stayed in the fight and flight mode and tense and, pissed at herself and all that stuff. Or she would have felt like in order to say no, she had to say a lot of excuses.
Right.
Well, here's why I can't, or kind of get like abrasive. Because if you're not used to being able to say no, you sometimes like drop the hammer. Right. I can't believe you asked me that. No, right? But to come from that place of, to be able to speak from your own experience requires that you know your own experience and that you have enough of a regulated nervous system to communicate it from a place of a whole brain, not a lizard brain.
Right.
Because she said, I'm nervous that if I say no, you're going to think I'm rigid and I don't care about you. Like, how could that be any more true and any more disarming?
Yeah. And I like how, if you're doing that, if you're speaking what feels true to you in the moment, if you take the time to connect and have that pause and then respond instead of react, all of those examples of what, the opposite of what you could have done, like you could have like either just gone right into people pleasing mode and said yes, you could have like dropped the hammer and overreacted because you're panicky, you could have like, those examples are all, to me, examples of you abandoning yourself. Like, that's not you connected with yourself, that's just you continuing to abandon yourself in that situation because you actually don't want to do the thing. So saying yes is abandoning yourself. You don't want to show up as an angry, irate person, so showing up that way is sort of abandoning who you want to be and
Absolutely.
who you are. Yeah, so this all connects back to that idea of being with yourself more often. And then to just take it to one more tangent, because this is how I like to roll. I like to roll like this because I'm thinking in my mind about the connection between this and, for so many of my clients, those unhealthy behaviors that they're using as coping mechanisms, which are really in the moment, it's them not pausing, not connecting with themselves. So not doing that, feeling the emotion, but not allowing themselves to feel it physically, only becoming aware of it in their brains, their brain thinking, fix this. The solution, the reliable solution being have a drink, which is then also not truthful. That's also that's also them abandoning themselves, because once you go into that place, you are no longer, I mean, obviously alcohol is a great obvious example of this. Once you're drinking, then you can't be yourself because you're now chemically altered by the drug, right? So the idea of abandoning yourself just goes to that next step on all of this. So I don't know if that's just making this super complicated, but I just thought of that.
No, it's
coping mechanism thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then what happens from there is, if you're not relating to yourself, that it's impossible to relate to anyone or thing. I think that's this piece of, like, I keep putting my hands on my chest, my heart, because there's a sense of, like, if I'm here in a body and I can feel me, then you can feel me. At least there's the hope of it. If I can't feel me, you can't feel me.
Right. And if you can't feel me, then we're not relating, really.
We're not relating.
This isn't genuine connection. This is
attachment, this is, or this is like kind of keeping each other at a safe distance, or we don't. And I think this is one of the things I feel really, really passionate about. And I appreciate you unpacking all the different aspects of the work, because it's all really important. But I really come down to, like, I think the thing that our world needs right now is people who know how to relate. And I think so much of the pain that we experience, and it got really heightened during COVID, is that we feel alone. And sometimes we feel the most alone in our relationships, because we just don't know how to be ourselves in them, because it is like a pretty complex skill set.
Yeah, for sure.
That we might have gotten pieces of, or we might have gotten none of the pieces. And it's all the other burnout, the coping mechanism, all of them stem from that.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me. So if someone's listening, because I'm so sure there will be women listening who are thinking about this maybe for the first time, thinking, starting to develop an awareness around the fact that maybe they are trying to numb or escape or fix emotions instead of letting themselves feel them in their body. And then maybe that is leading to them showing up in a way that isn't authentic, that is disconnected from themselves, that is making it difficult for them to form the types of relationships that they want to have. What would you say is kind of the first step? Because it is complicated, right? So like, where would you suggest, what are some things people can take away as sort of things to practice or start with around this if they want to work on improving this?
Yeah. So the first place I would say is to really take in the words, your insides matter. Your insides matter. And the way that you start to make that real is by paying attention to them. If you are used to only paying attention to what's going on outside of you, start practicing shuttling.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think of it as like sonar. You know how you send out pings, pings, pings. Well, send some pings in your direction. What's happening for me when I'm talking to this person? Is it pleasant? Am I having a good experience? Do I need to, shift how I'm sitting to be more comfortable? Do I have a full bladder and I have to go pee? Start for every 5 things you pay attention to outside of you, just check in. Are my shoulders tight? Is my stomach turning? Because that piece of really believing that your insides matter is what changes how you show up for yourself and how you show up as yourself with other people. And so it's a bit of a top-down thing first, like from your head to your body saying my insides matter. And then bottom up from your body to your head, paying attention to your body. And, I tell my clients sometimes new clients, I say, set a timer on your phone to go off 4 or 5 times a day. And every time it goes off, let that be a reminder for you to do something to remember you have a body. Get up from your desk and shake, or go walk outside and get the mail and, stretch your arms, or go in the bathroom and splash water on your face and come back to 30 seconds of experiencing yourself and not thinking about something. That's the beginning part.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a great place for people to start. And the other thing I was thinking of that isn't quite directly connected to that, but that popped into my head, I'm just curious about the idea of really starting to pay attention to how often you're labeling the emotion that you're feeling as good or as bad, or even like labeling it period, because in my experience, we get it wrong a lot. Like we feel it in our body and we label it as something just to try to explain it away or fix it. But the other thing that people do, and certainly I do this a lot, is like label it as bad or undesirable, the emotion. And I remember listening to a podcast ages ago, and I honestly think it was Brene Brown talking to Glennon Doyle, but it might've been somebody else. But anyway, it was one or the both of them. And they were talking about, oh no, it wasn't. It was Liz Gilbert, I think. Talking about one of them. Anyway, one of those 3. And they were talking about how we celebrate laughter and joy and all of those emotions that we label as positive. And it's totally okay to laugh your ass off, but it's not okay to cry. And, when we got to that point, how do we get to this point where we label these emotions and put them in a category of sort of acceptable versus non-acceptable emotions? And what would happen if we just neutralize that and just called it an emotion and let ourselves feel it? And how different would that make things for us if we gave ourselves the space to do that? I mean, I always remind my clients that if they're feeling something, it's just their body letting them know that something important is happening. It's just like marking something's happening, pay attention, don't just move on. Like there's something going on in our bodies. But I think the labeling piece is getting us in trouble a lot. What do you think of that?
I wholeheartedly agree. And I think one of the techniques for that, when it's a quote unquote negative emotion or a bad emotion you don't want to feel, what tends to happen is when we label it and then we distract ourselves from it, right? That's the abandonment, that's the coping mechanisms. So another thing to do would be to say, I don't want to feel this way. And what's different about that, if you say, I don't want to feel this way, it's you being matched up with your experience again. Because anytime I'm binging Netflix, or someone's binging food or drinking alcohol to numb a feeling, what's actually true is I don't want to feel this way.
Right.
And if you can say to yourself, I don't want to feel this way, this little magic thing happens and you're back feeling what you're feeling. Right. You see how that works? It's like, because what you're really feeling is resistance.
Right.
To a feeling.
Right.
And so name the resistance, and then you get back to yourself. And I've seen it happen. I felt it happen to myself. You get resources back, just that tiny little bit of a shift into like, I'm here, this pain is here, but I'm here too.
Yeah.
And that's what we need. It's like,
as opposed to judging, because that's very different to say, I shouldn't be feeling this way, or should be able to deal with this differently, which separates us from what's happening in our body, puts us back in our head, and means that we don't actually feel and process the emotion.
Right.
That
Exactly.
judgment. Yeah. That makes total sense.
Like you gotta like stay with yourself, like stay. And you don't have to be calm and happy. You can be resistant, but be resistant. Just don't shame yourself. Don't should yourself.
Right. Exactly. Don't judge it. Just let yourself feel it. And like I was saying earlier, if you feel it, it's real. So just let yourself feel that thing.
Right. And stop asking the question, because that's the other part of the figuring it out is like, why am I feeling this way?
Right.
Or what, and I tell my clients, anytime you find yourself asking yourself a question about a feeling, turn it into a statement. So why am I feeling sad turns into I'm feeling sad. So different.
Yes, it's really, really different. I like that. That's great advice. This is so interesting. What an interesting conversation. I wasn't sure we came in. Jay and I had an offline conversation and I was like, I'm not sure because she has a number of things we could have talked about. And I wasn't sure which area, where we were going to end up. But I think this has been, for me, really an interesting conversation. And I've learned a lot from this. And I know that it's not something we spent a lot of time talking about on the podcast yet. So I hope that it was very interesting for everyone who is listening as well. So thank you so much for coming on and explaining all of this to us. And it's such a hard thing to articulate.
It is.
This whole feeling. And honestly, the funniest thing about the felt sense, if anyone's listening who's in my writing group, they're going to laugh at this. But my writing coach, Ann Dowsett Johnston, who's amazing, always talks about felt sense. And for the first 6 writing classes, I had no idea what she was talking about. And I have a folder on my laptop that says felt sense, and it's all of my writing. Everything I've ever written in the last 2 years is in this felt sense folder. And honestly, up until today, I'm not sure I really understood what felt sense meant. So that was actually
there you go.
In it, yes, on its own, that was helpful. Jay, how do people find out more about you? Where can they go?
Yeah, they can go to my website, which is jay-fields.com, and it's JAY-fields. And you can find information about my coaching, individual and group coaching, as well as I have a bunch of LinkedIn learning courses that really address this as it applies in a work situation.
Yeah.
And I have a newsletter that goes out once a week that talks about all this stuff like in real life. So story-based, how do we do this? Sort of thing.
Oh, that's amazing. That's great. Yeah, I took a look at your LinkedIn courses. They looked really interesting. So for anyone who's thinking about how this might be affecting them in the workplace, those courses look great. So I will put Jay's information, her website information, in the show notes with this podcast. And thank you again for being here. And thanks to everybody for listening.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a burnout and balance coach, I help busy high achievers like you create a more balanced, joyful life. If you've been putting yourself last for way too long and are worried that you're burning out, grab your free burnout checklist at www.wendymccallum.com/checklist. That's www.wendymccallum.com/checklist.